All right,
Thanks,
everybody,
everyone.
ready to go? I know this is a session after lunch, and that is a little bit difficult. And for those of you who are fasting, thank you for being here. And I think I was said Ramadan Karim. Yes, Karim, yes. All right, so welcome to this session on catalyzing the recovery and of social community enterprises for transformation, also known as CRESCENT. Dr. Lisa, you have really a gift of coming up with acronyms that are just amazing. Yeah. So the session is about towards inclusive recovery and accelerating the sustainable development goals. I am Laina, Greene, CEO of Angels of Impact, which is a social impact fund based in Singapore. And we focus on offering what we call relationship-based financing, which is integrated capital or blended capital, as a lot of people call it. But we also give technical assistance with the funding. And we focus on women-led and indigenous community-based enterprises that are tackling poverty through sustainable businesses. So we've been around for the last 7 years, and we've worked with about 40 different, I heard a feedback right there. Okay, 40 different community-based enterprises and impacted about 62,000 lives. I know some of you know me from my previous lives, and Dr. Lisa is learning about how many previous lives I've had, but yes, like a cat. So some of which I was a senior advisor to Ashoka when I lived in Indonesia. That's why I can speak a little bit Bahasa, yeah. I was also the assistant director of the Asia Center for Social Enterprise and Philanthropy at the NUS Business School in Singapore. And that's how I got to know Dr. Lisa and also Dr. Albert Teo, who was actually the founder of ASAP. Very big shoes to follow with Dr. Albert Teo. I also have a different life in tech. And I think Carlos and others have met me through my life in tech, where I have 30 years working at the organizations like ITU, Intelsat. I ran an e-learning company, and I was also the first Secretary General of the Asia Pacific Internet Association. So now I'm running the co-convener with Dr. Albert, the Technology Innovations for Sustainable Development as well. Although that was a hat I was trying to get away from for a long time. No. So all of you know that COVID-19 has really impacted social enterprises. I know within Angels of Impact Network itself, many of our social enterprises faced up to 70% reduction on their revenue. We did run a program with the ASEAN Secretariat in 2021 with 17 enterprises from 9 countries. And during that time, we actually also offered COVID relief funds and technical assistance for which we were able to help them at least survive. And we are happy to know that many of them are back on track again to pre-pandemic, at least close to pre-pandemic stages. So there's signs of hope. Hopefully there won't be a recession or depression that comes in. We also know the ranks of the poor have swelled through COVID-19, right? In fact, one of the studies I saw said that the achievements that we made through the MDGs of eradicating extreme poverty have been erased. And to many ways, we are where we were 30 years ago. And that's really quite sad. Yesterday, you heard many, many presentations talking about what was missing. And if you all remember, most people talked about access to funding as a very key component, as well as capacity building and technical assistance, right? But I would like to add that, you know, the funding that we give, it's not just money, but the type of money and the values alignment of the money. I love the presentation this morning from our Maori friend, Jason, who reminded us about giving it with heart. And Edgar Villanueva, he wrote a book called Decolonizing Wealth. And he actually talked about, can we use money as medicine to create a new system that can help us build back better and fairer. I love that when you brought that up at meeting. So we're talking about funding in this panel today, right? We're going to be talking about the CRESCENT initiative, but I just wanted to give a little bit of framing as well. We're talking about poverty alleviation. Back in 2015, I believe, the Monitor Group report wrote a report called From Blueprint to Scale. And in that report, they had actually looked at, I think, Acumen's portfolio, as well as different social enterprise portfolio. And what they found was that impact investors actually do not like to touch poverty. And therefore, in that report, they called for philanthropic dollars to go into what was called enterprise philanthropy. Because if you remember, at that time, philanthropy money only went to charities. So they were trying to mindset shift people and say, look here, you can also give it to community-based enterprises. However, the shift happened a little bit too much because everyone started getting on board with impact investing. Now, impact investing is slightly different because it's do good, do well, right? That means GIIN, which is an organization of impact investors, did a report in 2020. And what they found is that a lot of impact investors are still looking for market returns, or maybe a little bit less, what they call concessionary rates, but some impact as a side dish in some way, or different ways of looking at what impact is, right? So what we know is that we have a glaring gap on financing. And unfortunately, when you're talking about, and also a lot of family foundations and governments and even UN agencies are now also moving in that spectrum of impact investing. So we've gone from charity to impact investing and everything in between, which is where a lot of social enterprises and community-based enterprises lie, therefore lack funding. So what is really needed, and one of the things Angels of Impact has been driving is this concept of restorative investing, and recognizing that marginalized communities are actually marginalized because of the system of finance that we have, right? System of finance is let's make money from money. And when we have marginalized communities, we have poverty. Professor Yunus actually wrote the book, Creating a World Without Poverty. And he said we have poverty because of economics and systems of finance we have. So if we want to change it, we have to create a new form of finance. And restorative investing is actually based off Namaka Akbo, who came up with something called restorative economics. And it's about shifting power and wealth back into communities, because communities are the ones, we call them the weavers of a resilient, sustainable, and just society. So that's where we want to flow the money. So, which is why Angels of Impact is delighted to be part of the CRESCENT initiative, which was conceived to address the major challenges created by the pandemic and to channel new forms of financing to help develop new and assist existing social enterprises to recover, reposition, pivot, and innovate. So this plenary that we have today aims to really share the CRESCENT initiative, which is co-developed by social enterprise stakeholders and partners in Asia Pacific, and explore the opportunities and potentials, how we can all partner for inclusive recovery. And like Dr. Lisa always says, to build back better and fairer. Fairer is very important. So on that note, I'm going to first introduce, we have 3 speakers who are going to introduce the concepts of new forms of financing. And we'll start with you, Jonathan Wong. Jonathan Wong is the Chief of Technology and Innovation in UNESCAP. He has spearheaded social innovation and social enterprise in public policy with numerous governments across the Asia-Pacific region. He has also set up a collaboration with the Global Steering Group for Impact Investment, GSG, to build a stronger evidence base for policymakers with respect to impact investing. Jonathan will speak on the role of social enterprises in addressing the challenges and gaps of the SDG implementation in the Asia-Pacific region. Jonathan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, and thank you very much for inviting me again to speak at this, and welcome all to the UN HQ in Bangkok. Where do I start? I'm not very well prepared, so it may come out better this way. You know, I always say I'm not a social entrepreneur, and however, my whole life has been in service of social entrepreneur, shall we say. In my previous life, I worked in venture capital, and I actually set up some impact funds in a previous life where I was quite good at raising money, where I wanted to kind of provide that financial support to social entrepreneurs in particular. And I moved to ISEA, oh God, 7 or 8 years ago now. It's gone very quickly. When my role changed again, not really working on social entrepreneurship, but actually working with governments on how they could put in place an enabling environment for social entrepreneurs to develop their ideas and to scale. So maybe if I step back a bit to explain why I'm so interested in this agenda, and as the topic of this is post-pandemic recovery and SDGs, I will link it to this. If we step back in time, I suppose enterprise entrepreneurship has been a source of innovation and economic dynamism throughout our region, the Asia-Pacific region. It's lifted millions of people out of poverty. But at the same time, maybe not so good for people and planet. You know, we've seen CO2 emissions rising in step with the industrial revolutions. We've seen income inequalities growing, like today greater than they've ever been before. And that's only been exacerbated by the pandemic, which has really been a story of the haves and the have-nots. Through the pandemic and through the multiple crises that we face, we've seen energy prices soaring. We've seen certain companies' tech stock prices soaring, while the very, very poorest people have been unable to make a living. And for me, that is not an economy that works. That is a broken economy in dire need of innovation. And this is where I think social entrepreneurs play a critical role in really providing that vision of what a new economy would look like as we build back better, which is more inclusive and sustainable, given what social entrepreneurs are trying to do, looking at kind of market ways of kind of solving social and environmental challenges. So I think social entrepreneurs is incredibly important, especially when we talk about recovery, because we do need a new economic model that we all know is broken. On top of that, on the second kind of topic of this session, which is around accelerating the SDGs, I don't know if any of you saw yesterday, or was it the day before, UNESCAP released its SDG progress report, which showed not great progress on the SDGs. Indeed, some going backwards, particularly on climate. So we're behind in meeting the SDGs by 2030, and it's looking decades beyond that if we carry on this trajectory. So what we do need is new ideas and new solutions, and this is where social entrepreneurs come in place as well. So again, as I mentioned, my role at UNESCAP now, my previous life I used to invest in social entrepreneurs. Now I really advise governments on policy and strategy, is actually to ask the question, if governments think that we do need a new economy, and I think many do, if they think social entrepreneurs can provide that model of how new business could operate, new investment could operate, which I think they do, what should they do? And there's kind of 4 key points. No, there's 5 points I'll make here. Do cut me off, by the way.
I will.
Because I will go on. Do I have a bit more time? All right. Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
You can have another 10 minutes.
Just be rude with me. Okay, fine. Okay. I'll go 5 points, then not 3. Okay. I think the first point is, I think we discussed this previously. I mean, what I always say to governments is everything starts with education. No, I won't give away my age, but when I was at business school, moved into venture capital, and I worked in the city in London, they taught me one thing and one thing only. They taught me how to make money. And I think this is where things need to change. We need the education system, business schools in particular, to be embracing kind of social and environmental challenges alongside kind of teaching business. So I think it's the first thing, so that the social entrepreneurship mindset, as I see it, rather than maybe an enterprise, moves into all sectors of society, be it social entrepreneurs moving into government or corporations, or indeed starting with their own NGOs, cooperatives, or whatever that may be. So one point is always preach for education and social entrepreneurship around that. I think secondly, I think governments can play kind of a threefold role in terms of being a market facilitator, a market participant, and a market regulator. And as the topic of this session is on funding, let me just give some examples of what that may look like. So a government playing a market facilitator role could look like something what the government in India is doing, which is very boldly launching a social stock exchange, where it's linking organizations that are looking to generate social value to potential investors, using a traditional kind of stock exchange type mechanism. So I think it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, because not many countries in the world have such a mechanism. And to your point around needing new financing mechanisms, it's quite unique. There's something like this. So let's see how that plays out and see if it does fulfill the promise to unlock more social impacts through providing financing to kind of, if you like, social purpose organizations, for want of a better word. I think the second way governments can play a role is as a market participant. Now we've seen several governments across the region starting up their own impact funds. I mean, more recently in Bangladesh, to give an example, we worked with the government of Bangladesh on the Prime Minister's flagship Startup Bangladesh Fund. And we tried to integrate within the fund specific criteria, not just around whether this organization will be commercially viable or will make money, but what is a social environmental impact around that. So having more governments looking at how they can participate in the market by providing funding, both through their own impact funds, but maybe even through procurement as well. And where I'm from in the UK, I'm British Chinese. We worked in the UK on procurement legislation, which specified that X percentage of contracts go to social enterprises. And these are kind of, again, quite tedious sounding policies, but could unlock potentially millions for social entrepreneurs. So governments can certainly play a role in that regard. I think the third role is around regulation. And I mean, you'll have heard from people from Thailand giving a snapshot of what's going on in Thailand with the Thailand Social Enterprise Act, and many countries in the region do have. Korea, another example. Where, I mean, you and I were in Korea a few years ago, where we met colleagues there around their Korea Social Enterprise Act as well, which give investors specific tax incentives to invest in social enterprises. So, if, for example, you're an investor looking to invest in potentially this very nice boutique hotel in downtown Sukhumvit versus this social enterprise that is looking to develop, I don't know, low-cost housing solutions to people at the base of the economic pyramid, but you get a tax break there, would that sway your decision? So I think these regulations and incentives that governments can put in place, these financial incentives, could be quite valuable as well. The final point I'll make is just on the importance of any economic recovery having women at the center of it. It's estimated through UNESCAP research that putting an emphasis on gender equality could add as much as 12% of GDP to countries as they try to build back better from the pandemic. And for me, that's not a dividend any country can afford to ignore at this moment in time. So a lot of our work within UNESCAP as well has been around gender-led investing. And we've done several things around this, from a few years ago working with ISEA to set up the first women's livelihood bond, to in Cambodia, more recently setting up a guarantee scheme for investors to invest in women entrepreneurs. So some investors, there's this bizarre perceived risk that investing in women might not yield as big results, which is crazy, is a bias, and is against all the evidence. So what we did in Cambodia was set up a guarantee fund that said, okay, if you do invest in a women-led enterprise or a specific social enterprise, we will guarantee that you'll get your money back. And lo and behold, no one's called off that guarantee yet, because the women do well, that they pay back. And we recently as well set up supported development, something called Swift Capital, which is one of the few, I think one of the only gender-led investing firms based out of Singapore as well. So they're just, maybe a snapshot of why I think social entrepreneurship is important, particularly for post-pandemic recovery and the SDGs. And from a government perspective, who I advise, what I personally think government should be thinking about in terms of policy, regulation and legislation. I'll stop there.
You said you had 5 points, so you made 4.
I think education, facilitation,
Regulation, important
women, and market participant.
Yeah,
participation.
Right.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm just taking notes.
I do speak quickly, by the way. So.
Yeah, no worries. That was great. No, totally. In Angels of Impact as well, we found that because we focus on investing in women, it's 100% repayments that we've had. Is no risk at all. So thank you very much for sharing this perspective. Next, we will have Dr. Marie Dacanay, which Lisa Maria, that all of you know. So I don't think I need to introduce you because we all know who you are. You are infamous. I'll pass the floor to you. Yes. Pass the floor to you. Yeah.
Thank you, Laina, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm not going to talk too macro today because my task is to actually share with you a program that has been under program development for a few months, supported by Catalyst 2030. I think Jason introduced what Catalyst 2030 was this morning, and we are part of that actually. So I'm going to introduce to you a program, a project, an initiative that we started to conceive of to help or to facilitate the process of making social entrepreneurship become a major pathway towards inclusive recovery, building back fairer, and accelerating the SDGs. No? But we have called the project, the initiative, Catalyzing the Recovery of Social and Community Enterprises for Transformation in Asia Pacific. We actually did another program development process in the Philippines, and we presented the results of that in a Philippine conference in October, and where some of you were there. But this one that I'm presenting now is the result of the program development process in the Asia Pacific region. And I think I'll just go through this. Next slide. So I'll first share with you the context, objectives, and outcomes of CRESCENT, the intended outcomes, and then I will talk about the components that we conceived of, considering what we believe would achieve the objectives and outcomes that we have defined, particularly the setting up of a social enterprise recovery and innovation fund, the setting up of a CRESCENT virtual hub, and the setting up of a set of support services for the 5 social entrepreneurship platforms for inclusive recovery, building back fairer, and accelerating the SDGs that we've been talking about since yesterday. And of course, program management system. So it's trying to respond to a macro problem, of course, but what I'm presenting to you is the result. It's a work in progress, by the way. So it's not cast in stone. So it's open to inputs from all the brilliant heads in this room. And I'll just go through this process of presenting to you so that maybe the best way maybe to look at this session is I'd like to present to you a framework through which we could gather more inputs from all of you. Yeah. So so let me now talk about the context. So as I said, CRESCENT Asia Pacific was an initiative, is an initiative in program development and resource mobilization. We're still in the program development and resource mobilization phase, no? Not quite even in the resource mobilization phase for Asia Pacific because we're still crafting the program, supported by Catalyst 2030, and it's intended for a 2023 to 2030 program with a 3-year pilot phase. And it's conceived to address the major challenges of social enterprises and the poor. We started by responding to the COVID-19 crisis, but as we were dialoguing with all the stakeholders regionally and even globally, actually, everybody was saying it's not just about COVID. That COVID, on top of COVID, before COVID, there was actually a development crisis. That no matter what we were doing in terms of poverty reduction, poverty was not getting better. Inequality was worsening. Yeah. And the other crisis, of course, is the climate crisis. So the advice that we've gotten from the social enterprise community is that it is not possible for us to conceive of CRESCENT by just as a response to COVID-19. It has to be a response to the multiple crises that we face. The third point is that we started by proposing a global initiative to Catalyst 2030 so that we can actually be grand. But we were advised by Catalyst 2030 that maybe we need a pilot. So we need a pilot country. So we chose the Philippines because that's where we're based. And there is a poverty reduction for social entrepreneurship coalition that is actually active there. And we chose the Asia Pacific region because as a proponent of this as a global initiative, we thought that the Asia Pacific region where we've set up platforms for inclusive recovery, building back fairer, and accelerating the SDGs was a good place to start. Yeah, it's the best region. I wouldn't go that far. Latin America will not agree with you. But of course, CRESCENT Asia Pacific also builds on the initiatives, as I said, of the 5 social entrepreneurship SDG platforms that we have started to talk about since yesterday. Yeah. So these 5 platforms, next slide, please. These 5 platforms are, first of all, the women's empowerment, livelihoods, and food in agricultural value chains. As you know, this is co-convened with CISIP and Trubus Binaswadaya. And we have been trying to push for a set of benchmarks and guidelines for transformational partnerships and women's economic empowerment in agricultural value chains to change the face of agricultural value chains in the Asia Pacific region, but we started in ASEAN for the past few years. We also have the Rural Revitalization Youth and Social Entrepreneurship Platform, co-convened by PRM, Rural Reconstruction Nepal, and Sources for Action China, which is intending to change the rural development policy and practice, no? So that rural youth, urban youth, youth all over, can become part of a process of revitalizing rural economies through social entrepreneurship. And then there's the third platform, which we launched yesterday. We're co-convening this with Angels of Impact and the Association of Progressive Communications. We call it the Technological Innovations for Sustainable Development Platform, where we have decided to focus on helping to connect the unconnected and bridging the digital divide by promoting community networks, not only promoting, but seeding, growing, and mainstreaming community networks and community connectivity initiatives, complementary connectivity initiatives, as Carlos will say, is being used now, no, by mainstream bodies. Yeah, complementary connectivity initiatives that would make sure that the 47% that are not yet that connected can actually be connected to the internet and will actually become part of digital transformation and the digital economy. And we also have the Decent Work for All in Sustainable Value Chains platform, co-convened by World Fair Trade Organization Asia and the Asia South Pacific Bureau for Adult Education. And that platform is all about ensuring that we actually are able, social entrepreneurship initiatives are able to provide decent work for all, not only decent work per se, but they have to be sustainable and they have to promote sustainable consumption and production and a circular economy. And then there's the Health for All platform. We weren't able to have a forum on this, but there have been many successful models on community-based health and wellness initiatives, for example, that have been promoted by Dompet Duafa and Suham in Indonesia and India, that have shown that the poor and the marginalized can actually have access to health that is both promotive, that is preventive, as well as health services, quality health services can actually be delivered to the poor and marginalized communities. So these platforms, the reason why we start with these platforms is that we believe that these platforms that were developed since 2020, no? Since the COVID-19 pandemic, we went through a process of action research. We went through a process of engaging social entrepreneurs and social enterprise resource institutions in the region in building an agenda. And these were actually the 5 thematic platforms that were evolved from that process. We started to present these platforms in 2020 during a conference that we co-convened with UNESCAP as well. We were able to launch one platform then. We launched, that was the Women's Empowerment, Livelihood, and Food and Agricultural Value Chains. We launched the Rural Revitalization Youth and Social Entrepreneurship platform in 2021. And then the Technological Innovations for Sustainable Development platform we launched yesterday. And we have to launch 2 more platforms, but we will get there. But all I'm saying is, it is these platforms that embody social entrepreneurship initiatives that we believe can be significant contributions of social enterprises to inclusive recovery, building back fairer, and accelerating the SDGs. So building on this, the CRESCENT overall objective is to actually harness multi-stakeholder collaboration to assist the recovery and repositioning of the social enterprise sector as a major player in inclusive recovery towards building back fairer and accelerating the achievement of the SDGs in the Asia-Pacific region. Of course, this is a lofty objective, and we thought, why don't we conceive of something that can be doable in 3 years? Yeah, so that we can actually start to talk about doing something that is doable. And we conceived of a pilot phase to demonstrate the important role and impact of social enterprises as transformational partners of the poor towards inclusive recovery, building back fairer, accelerating the achievement of the SDGs. And the outcomes that we came up with, next slide please, is that by 2030, CRESCENT should have made a difference on the lives and livelihoods of a significant number of poor living in extreme or multidimensional poverty as stakeholders of social enterprises, in the process directly contributing to accelerating the SDGs with measurable outcomes in 12 of the 17 goals. I will go to which 12 goals are they. And then with this set of outcomes should also come with a successor generation of youth engaged in social entrepreneurship, rural revitalization, and sustainable development. And another outcome that at least 50% of stakeholders engaged are women. And the next slide, please. The 12 SDGs that we wanted to contribute to are all this. I'm not going to go into specifics now, but it's about no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, reduce inequality, decent work and inclusive growth, inclusive and sustainable industrialization and innovation, responsible consumption and production, sustainable communities, climate action, gender equality, peace, justice, and strong institutions, and partnership for the goals. And we conceived of 3 components for the program. The first component, consistent with restorative financing, we wanted to set up a social enterprise recovery and innovation fund as a financing mechanism that would provide what we call accessible hybrid financing for social enterprises. And the hybrid nature is to ensure the provision of the 2 types of services that the poor need to become stakeholders of social enterprises. Transactional services that would make sure that they're engaged to become effective workers, suppliers, clients, participants in the market or in social enterprises, but at the same time, transformational services so that they're enabled to become economic players. Capacity building, leadership development, these are transformational services. They're not the usual services that ordinary enterprises or even impact investors would invest in. So this combination is actually one of grants. It's a combination of grants as well as loans. The loans can have responsive terms, including 0 or low interest. But when we are able to work with government, it can even mean there's a guarantee fund pool, so it's non-collateralized. But for that to happen, we need to work with government. And then, of course, where appropriate, equity. If there is trust, maybe there can be equity. And then the second point I'd like to share with you about the financing mechanism is in terms of fund management, the intention is not to create a new funding mechanism. The intention is to have a consortium of existing resource institutions that are already providing hybrid financing services to social enterprises. Laina's organization is one example. In the Philippines, I think he's participating online. Dodo Makasait of the Foundation for Sustainable Society Incorporated is another funding mechanism. Change Fusion in Thailand is another funding mechanism. So we have many funding mechanisms that are already effectively serving social enterprises, especially what is called the missing middle. And our intention is for us to work with them. We set up the fund, but when we actually disburse the funds, it's through these existing mechanisms. But we just set up a governance system and maybe a lead agency among these funding institutions, depending on the requirements of the fund source. The third, the Social Enterprise Recovery and Innovation Fund shall also have priorities. For the first 3 years, we think that funding startups might be difficult to demonstrate impact, because startups will take a little while. So for the first 3 years, we thought that the existing social enterprises and social enterprise-led value chains needing to recover, ready for scaling up and or replication, that would provide sustainable livelihoods, decent work, and fair trade among the poor and marginalized sectors would be one priority. Promoting food security, local food systems, and community and climate resilience. Those who promote sustainable consumption and production, a circular economy, and climate-smart agriculture, regenerative agriculture, sustainable agriculture, and fishery technologies. And of course, they promote women's economic empowerment. The second set of priorities have to do with social enterprise innovations. These include the digital transformation process of social enterprises and communities. So we're hoping that we could support community networks, complementary connectivity initiatives led by social entrepreneurs, not just to improve access, but to improve the productivity, effectiveness, efficiency, incomes, and benefits derived by social enterprise stakeholders in various value chains, to promote the effective participation of social enterprises and their stakeholders in virtual marketplaces, and then community-based health and wellness initiatives, including the replication of successful models that combine promotive and preventive aspects of health and improve access of poverty sectors to quality health services. And of course, the third priority proposed is youth-led social enterprises to engage and develop the youth as social entrepreneurs and social innovators. I'm running out of time. I've run out of time. So I'm okay? It's okay. So the Social Enterprise Recovery and Innovation Fund will have the following key result areas. Next slide. Yeah. Among poverty groups, these are some of what we came up with in terms of key result areas. Increased number of the poor, provided the keywords are sustainable livelihoods and decent work in social enterprises and social enterprise-led value chains. Increased number and benefits among social enterprise stakeholders practicing sustainable consumption and production technologies, including small producer communities adopting climate-smart, regenerative, and sustainable agriculture and fishery technologies. Increased number and improved productivity and incomes of marginalized producers serving as supplier communities and providers of inputs and services to social enterprise-led value chains. Increased access by producers and marginalized social enterprise stakeholders to safe, healthy food from diversified farms, local food systems, and sustainable agriculture and fishery-based value chains. Increased capability and meaningful access to internet services among marginalized social enterprise stakeholder communities, and improved health and wellness, as well as access to quality health care by marginalized social enterprise stakeholder communities. So I'm not going to go into the next set of key result areas because I might lose time. But we have some key result areas in relation to social enterprises themselves, the consumers and the public, and then youth, women's empowerment, and social and the sustainable consumption and production. No? But I'll just share, we will share these slides with you because we hope that we could get additional inputs to this in the days to come. This is a work in progress, as I've said. But let me go now to component number 2. Component number 2 would be a CRESCENT virtual hub. This is designed to establish a knowledge portal, a web page, a website, an e-library, an interactive management and monitoring and evaluation system, and many virtual tools and applications that would actually help the platforms and help the Social Enterprise Recovery and Innovation Fund program participants to actually benefit from all the platforms and CRESCENT as a whole. And then in terms of components, we will actually be having segment, or there will be an aspect of content creation and development, and then the promotion and utilization of the CRESCENT virtual hub. No? I might not have the time either. I'm looking at my time. I've spent too much already. But the third component, is about is what we call the Social Entrepreneurship SDG Platform Support Services. These are intended to be the Secretariat support for the Social Entrepreneurship SDG platforms, because the platforms are intended to create communities of practice. They're intended to project collective impact in these thematic areas. They're projected to engage governments and engage multiple stakeholders to support the platforms, right? So in addition to that, we hope that a seed fund can be set up so that the social entrepreneurship SDG platform initiatives could be supported in terms of action research, learning exchange and capacity building, constituency building, partnership building, and ecosystem and policy advocacy agenda building and implementation. Of course, a third component would be program development and resource mobilization support. We hope to map resource institutions so that we can help the SDG platforms, the SE SDG platforms that we set up, do partnership and constituency building, as well as engage the relevant government agencies and programs, engage the right private sector organizations and initiatives, and engage with other multilateral development agencies to actually succeed, no, in the various initiatives of the platforms. The fourth item is actually something interesting. We conceived of it because we believe that even if the 5 platforms work together day and night, we will not be able to achieve something significant if we do not actually go through a process of encouraging the whole social enterprise community who before the 5 platforms were already there and doing impact can actually work with us. So we conceived of a systems development for CRESCENT program and fund affiliation, meaning to say, what does this mean? If you're an existing social enterprise or social enterprise resource institution, you're not part of the 5 platforms, or you're part of the 5 platforms, but you had existing programs and funds before, and you would want to enroll this so that we can actually project collective impact as a social enterprise sector in the Asia Pacific region, this is what this is intended to do. No? So we're hoping that we can affiliate programs and funds that have the same intention as CRESCENT, but are not necessarily initiated by the 5 platforms, in order for us to bring the social enterprise community together and show the whole world, or show Asia Pacific, that this is what we can do as a sector. And then during the second phase of CRESCENT, maybe we can leverage, no, with governments and multilateral agencies. So I think that's about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lisa. Turns out that our next speaker actually didn't come on. That's why I didn't mind you going on. I just wanted to pick up a couple of points, I guess, before we open up to the audience, because I know that Gomez actually asked me to keep a large portion of today's session to enable you to actually give feedback to CRESCENT. So part of this is actually crowdsourcing ideas from you as well, from what Dr. Lisa has just presented. But I just kind of wanted to pick out on a couple of points. So earlier when you mentioned hybrid, that's actually kind of what I also was talking about, blended and integrated finance. So there's some methodology that we need to come up with terminologies, I guess a nomenclature, because everyone's touching at different parts. You know, the 5 blind men and the elephant, everyone's touching at a different part and calling it something different. Yeah.
Blended financing, Laina, has been used by impact investors,
yeah,
in order to actually leverage with multilaterals and governments.
True.
And using that might be difficult for us.
Correct. So integrated capital is what people are using as an alternative as well. Yeah. But that's something that is, the devil is in the details. But it's a very key component in this region, because one of the things that I've seen is because of the lack of a social enterprise law in the different countries, most social enterprises in this region actually have 2 entities. They have a nonprofit arm and a for-profit arm. And that's because of the system of finance, right? People who give philanthropic dollars wants to give to a charity, so they have to set it up. And that is fine, because a lot of times social enterprises are doing a lot of community work. They are training weavers, they're having, and that actually taps the bottom line of the company. And then the impact investor type doesn't want to do all that stuff, so they set up a separate thing. So blended finance is actually very key. I mean, let's call it integrated capital. Hybrid financing is a good term, is also a very key component. And I just wanted to highlight that from what Dr. Lisa was saying. The other point that jumps up at me is that area when you talked about fund management, and this is going to be a collaborative with existing funds. I think that is really brilliant, because I've seen that happen in the US. There's an organization called Common Future. And what they took was Common Future, Native Women Lead, New Mexico Capital, and a Community Creative Lab. Each one was struggling with getting funding, but each one had a specific area that they were particularly good at. One was particularly good at community building and technical assistance. One had the back end to run a fund. One had the advocacy and the network to raise the funds. They closed funding a lot quicker than if the individual parts of them. So to me, I see that potential with CRESCENT, that if we all get, because this region is very fragmented as you can see. We do have a lot of impact funds, but again, it's the 5 blind men and the elephant. We don't really know what we're talking about when everyone says they are an impact fund. So those are some of the areas I think that we can come up. The last point that I wanted to highlight also, which touches a little bit on what you talk about, Jonathan, about the role that governments will play, right? So governments, I think, sometimes what happens is governments actually get excited about this and then they compete with what's happening with NGOs or private sector. So by setting up necessarily a fund on their own, if they become a fund of funds, that's fine. But when they try to do funds alone, then they could actually be minimizing the innovation that is happening as well, because they tend to look at things in a very traditional way. So maybe one additional thing I'll add to your list is how can, instead of setting up their own funds, they can actually support funds to actually thrive in this region. Restorative investing, I talked about very briefly. I wanted you just to point out 3 elements of restorative investing. One, it's non-extractive, because if you are dealing with poverty, you really cannot make money out of the poor. It's just unconscionable on so many levels, but at the same time, you'll never get systems change because you're constantly going to invest and then extract out, invest and extract out. You want to invest and let them prosper. And so then the community gets out of poverty. So the key fundamental part is it has to be non-extractive. So it's not just hybrid funding, but non-extractive funding. The second part is the how. So for example, the impact investors like to talk about pipeline, and a native group in the US said that pipelines is because a lot of times they put oil pipelines on the native lands. So they didn't like the word pipeline. So they call it deal flow, they call it whatever. But who gets funded? Who is visible? So you were talking about women. I 100% agree with you. How do we get over that unconscious bias? Because women are under-resourced, undervalued, underrepresented, and a lot of times invisible, especially in the impact investing space. I remember when we were pitching for funding from the Australian government, they ended up giving the money to an American to come to this region, to do what we were doing. Because to them, we couldn't be as capable to run a fund as opposed to an American woman coming to this region, for example. So we need to deal with that bias. So who gets funded? The due diligence process. We cannot use the old due diligence. It's very onerous. You go in there and you're like, give me all your documents. It's a very power differential. So restorative investing is also about giving value back to that person in that community and giving value to the wisdom, the indigenous wisdom, the indigenous systems, the knowledge that built, and factor that into who gets invested. So kind of similar to you in the sense of you're talking about, do you go to this boutique hotel or you go to that? We factor in there's a value, besides maybe a tax intensive, that's an additional value that is given. So that's another area. And then the terms, like when you're devising the terms, a lot of times convertible debt, Yes, but can we be a little bit more innovative? Revenue-based financing, for example, for agricultural business is very important because it's seasonal. And you need to be able to have loan forgiveness. Guarantees alone are not enough, right? You need to factor in. So there's all these different innovations in the terms. And then last but not least, the metrics. Because right now, a lot of impact metrics are coming from the investor side, whether it's, SROI, whether it's, a lot of it is coming from the investor side. What we also need is metrics that the community decides for itself, which is kind of why I also do like the lean data in Acumen, because it is all about the community deciding what's important for them and what their problems are and what needs to be fixed. So I just want to throw out 3 ideas out there on as we are looking at hybrid financing that we need to delve, as they say, the devil is in the details, right? So okay, on that note, I want to be able to open it up for feedback, for questions and answers on how do you think the CRESCENT initiative is, what are some of your suggestions? Do you agree with everything that was presented, for example? I'm sure everybody does. Dr. Lisa is always so brilliant. Yes, it's work in progress, yeah. So anyone would like to take the floor first to share opinions? How does CRESCENT sound to you? Yeah. Yes.
Hello.
Do we have a mic to him,
Am I
please?
audible?
Is there a mic? Okay.
I belong to the academic side, not the practical side, which you guys are. So if you just told about the matrices, so I can suggest you can go through Alkaya Foster model or human development indexing. So it will be easy for you to find the parameters and target area. So you won't be everywhere. And there's also multidimensional indexing, for example, poverty indexing or healthcare or life expectancy. Because the problem is that in HDI, if you go through the ranking, Southeast Asia or in India, this specific region is below 50. So we are not working on the specific target. Like SDGs, there are 17 goals and 200, more than 200 targets. So we have to be specific on what goals and targets we are working on. So it will be easy for human development indexing or for these nations to grow more and to be good in ranking. Other than that, rest is good. Thank you.
You want to comment?
Well, I'm a fan of the Human Development Index as an alternative measure to the GDP, yeah. But I think if you talk about measuring impact at the micro level, we will need to talk about development indexing in a different way.
Yeah.
And I think that's the reason why I actually presented some key result areas. Because, for example, when you say number of number of poor provided sustainable livelihoods or decent work, no? You will have to have parameters for decent work and sustainable livelihoods. So it's not just a matter of counting how many were employed, no? So I'm all for development indexing, but I've thought development indexing at the micro level, and it needs to be developed in a way that is sensitive to what makes sense at the micro level. And one of the proposals is we actually target sustainable livelihoods and decent work for everyone among the poor that we engage in social enterprises, no? Because when we talk about poverty, I think providing health, providing education are good. They're enablers, no? They're enablers for getting out of poverty. But if you talk about sustaining the movement out of poverty, it will have to be sustainable livelihoods and decent work. I think everybody here who has been in the social enterprise sector know that. But of course, there are also enabling, like apart from education and health, there's also meaningful connectivity, right? And other such things that would enable poverty groups to get out of multidimensional poverty. I hope I am able to respond to your concern, because I've thought development indexing as an alternative way of measuring impact at the micro level for social enterprises, inspired by the Human Development Index. No? So if you're interested to work on us with work with us on that, would be interested to work with you.
For sure. Thank you.
There's one other network that's working on well-being indexes. It's called Well-being and Equity in the World. It's coming out of the US, and they work globally with, and they've looked at the multidimensional of well-being. So that might be something you might be interested. And I know Native American groups in the US who are doing impact investing in their own way have even gone to the extent of like well-being and decent work is like broken down further to is the elder in the family still cared for? Is there safety for the girls? Because in the US, you know, with Native American women, missing and murdered women are quite high. So for them, they would actually do loan forgiveness if the project does not able to return the loan, but has actually kept people safe and families together. So those are interesting things to look at. Yeah. Anybody else?
Actually, somebody's from Greene Foundation here.
Yes,
I
that's
mean,
true.
yeah.
I did meet someone from
Yeah,
Greene.
because Greene Foundation developed the Movement Out of Poverty Index, yeah, which is actually a very interesting index. But the thing is, they don't use it as a measure of impact, no? They use it for targeting. The reason for that is that movement out of poverty is actually affected by many factors. It's not just, you know, the social enterprise, you know, providing inputs so that that person is now out of poverty. So multidimensional, I mean, the Movement Out of Poverty Index is a development index at the micro level. And it's a very important index, I think. But as the microfinance institutions found out in the process, it's difficult to use that for impact measure, because precisely there are many, especially if you're not in a remote area. Yeah, if you're in a remote area, maybe, right? Because your social enterprise intervention was the only factor that help the community to move out of poverty. But in many areas that are actually linked to markets and linked to communities and many things, many programs also happening at the same time, it's very difficult. And that's one of the reasons why we need to look for what we can measure that is attributable to social enterprises. And that's the reason why the first thing that came to our minds when we were dialoguing about what is a good impact measure is maybe we can work on an index on sustainable livelihoods and decent work, no? That can contribute directly to, I think, the discourse in the UN system about sustainable livelihoods and decent work.
Jonathan, I was just curious, since Lisa came after you, what are some of the thoughts you have on the CRESCENT project?
Just on the measurement point, it's really difficult. You see so many. I mean, at the moment, a framework was mentioned here, another one was mentioned there, another. There is so much out there,
yes,
and this, there's no standardization, and I often think to myself, is this a good or a bad thing, or is this just a symptom of the point in time where we're at on this journey around whether we're calling it blended finance, integrated, whatever we're calling it, is this just because it's also new and it's okay for things to be messy? I think the holy grail for kind of funding in this space is if you can kind of measure impacts and put a price on it. If we had that, life would be so simple, but it's so easy to say, so difficult to do. I mean, I go back to my life in when I used to invest in the healthcare sector, where in the UK they would price it. So for example, if they were going to decide on giving you some treatment in the UK, they put a price of £30,000 as a quality adjusted life year. Now what this meant was they said, okay, if this treatment extends your quality of life by 1 good year, is it above the, is it worth doing? But there was a standard measure across the whole of the. We're not there yet. So whether we use this index, that index, this framework, it's so difficult. So that was one point I would make. On CRESCENT itself, it's a point you raised actually around. You're right. One of the benefits of it could be is. So I established something called a global innovation fund, where you have your metrics and your certain sectors or agendas or geographies or target populations that you're looking to invest in, and you'd see a social entrepreneur pitch you for funding, and you'd say, actually, it's that bit I'm interested in. Yeah, exactly that. And then I'd speak to another fund, and they'd be, actually, it's that bit. Yeah. And you end up kind of trying to. Yeah, you put it together yourself, and it was really messy because I'd be like thinking, oh, I really want to fund these, but I can't fund in this country for this target people. But I think this is where CRESCENT could be really valuable, but by actually pooling these, and I think the funders would thank you for it as well, because it would take a lot of that job away from you, where you could go ahead and again be that mechanism to actually blend these different forms of capital, or even if they're the same sorts of capital, at least align them together so that they could become greater than some of their parts. So I think that's kind of what struck me, as you said it actually, and as these are presented, but one of the key benefits around this.
Yeah, absolutely. Then you have the added complication that a lot of impact investors do not like to define what exactly they invest in. So they won't say, I only do this, because they're always worried that there may be a unicorn out there somewhere. And unfortunately, the downside of that is social enterprises waste their time pitching to the wrong people. So that's another thing CRESCENT could do, is hopefully, if they are willing to be transparent, that we can create a little bit more transparency. Yeah, absolutely. Carlos?
Yeah, no, thank you. And thank you very much for the presentation. And what are my reflections about CRESCENT? I'm excited. I'm very excited, actually. My name is Carlos Rey Moreno. I work for the Association for Progressive Communications, and our logo is somewhere there. I signed something yesterday in one of these platforms around telecommunications, micro entrepreneurs or social enterprises providing telecommunication services. And we've been looking at this element of the missing middle for some time. I mean, most of the community networks have come from grants, and they bring this, I believe, this organizational culture element to live on grants, report on grants, kind of a poverty cycle in itself that doesn't allow you to take risk and grow from there and whatnot, which I think all of you from social enterprises look at it from a completely different angle. I think the beauty of our partnership come from there, no? And we realize about this and the missing middle that I didn't know existed in other sectors. I thought it was a telecom sector thing, right? Where the World Bank or any regional development bank will put a lot of big amounts of money into the government or into any particular big operator, because that's the only way they knew how to do things. So in the sector, you know that there are either grants or big money from the banks, but there is nothing in between, right? So there are some actors like Connectivity Capital that have been trying to bridge that gap, but there was nothing. So we started looking into this. This I'm going everywhere and nowhere, but what I wanted to say is that it's super interesting to see the mechanism there. I mean, we did publish a research last year in September that is financing mechanisms for community owned operators. That is very much about trying to start this dialogue, trying to say, well, there are different operators at different levels that require different financing mechanisms, what those financing mechanisms are there. Because what is true is that there is an ongoing recognition that big operators are extractivist, and they can be extractivist in urban areas with high density, with people who have the profit to be extracted, but they cannot continue extracting in rural areas and in people with, below the poverty threshold. And there is this affordability tension that is happening there, where they are providing services that are not used by anyone because people cannot pay them, but their business model don't allow them to do anything different. So we need to come up with new models such as social enterprises in telecommunications. And you see reports from the World Bank, you see reports from the Asian development banks, you see reports from the European Commission starting to talk about these mechanisms, guarantees. And I don't know what is a guarantee. I'm a telecommunication engineer, so it's very interesting how this conversation is going and how that expertise and the language that you do have that does exist in the social enterprises space, how it can come into this, because at least for this sector, there is money. There is money, there is knowledge that CapEx is required for infrastructure, but the only thing these investors know how to do is investing in big pots, and they don't know how to create different mechanisms around everything that you've been talking about. And I see a very interesting opportunity here working together on unlocking this type of funding for these other operators that are required. Thank you.
You know what? It's a really good point. I feel a bit embarrassed to say this now. My job title is the Chief of Technology Innovation. So a part of my job is around supporting kind of social entrepreneurship space. But I do actually advise governments on digital policy as well. And you're absolutely right. This language around in social entrepreneurship, we talk about impact investing, guarantee funds, social impact bonds. Why am I not using that language when I'm in that other world? You're absolutely right. And it just, as you were saying, I just thought I'm actually missing a trick here myself. In thinking through how this terminology and these ideas could help it, certainly in the digital sector and the technology sector as well. So I just thought it was a great point. Thank you.
Yeah, there's a lot of validity to actually bring the language in there. There's of course the issue of not being understood, right? Like what Carlos is talking about, ARPU, average revenue per user, is exactly what all telcos do it. And I don't know how many of you remember the days when we liberalized telecommunications. They actually had a universal service fund to make it affordable to go out. And yet, even with the universal service fund, nobody went out because the ARPU is very low and the maintenance costs, etc. But around the 90s, 2000 periods, we began to see the likes of Agile, a lot of other innovative ways of community-based networks. So in my former years in the ITU, I used to bring that up, and I pushed social entrepreneurship in that forums from, I believe it was like 2000 2004, and everyone was intrigued with it, talked about it, but they're typically, oh, Jeroo is online. Okay. So absolutely. So at some point we force the language in either thing, but Carlos said there's actually a great opportunity of unlocking new capital as well. Yeah, absolutely. Great. So we have Jeroo who's just joined us. Goma? She's online. Okay, great. Jeroo. She will be here 2 minutes. That will give me time to introduce her. Brilliant. She'll have a long. She is an amazing person. She's got a Wikipedia page to herself. So yes, she does. So our next speaker is Jeroo Billimoria, and she's the founder of several innovative and award-winning NGOs and has over 20 years experience running systems change organizations. She's a Skoll awardee and Ashoka and Schwab Fellow. She's also the founder of Catalyst 2030, which we've all been hearing and listening about and being amazed with, initiated by leading social entrepreneurs from Ashoka, echoing Greene, the Schwab Foundation, the Skoll Foundation, and other global networks of social entrepreneurs. The group is inclusive and is rapidly expanding to include governments, funders, bilateral organizations, multilateral organizations, and others seeking the timely achievement of the SDGs. So I guess SCAP's going to become a member of Catalyst. She is. Okay, there you go. As an individual. Okay. It aims to accelerate programs towards the SDGs by radically transforming social innovation ecosystems and driving systems change interventions at the country level. Jeroo will speak on opportunities and challenges around financing social entrepreneurship initiatives towards inclusive recovery and accelerating the SDGs. That took about 2 minutes. Perfect. Great, Jeroo. Welcome.
Hi, first of all,
Hi.
Marilisa, really sorry, I had a bit of a crisis. So
No,
I
we're
apologize
so
for
happy you
your
joined us.
Yeah, it's just totally my fault and I couldn't help it, but there was a crisis. First of all, congrats on organizing this conference. And I think it's very, very important issue. We are not being able to finance social enterprises as easily as we wanted. And I think though the need for finances is much more, at the global level, what we are noticing is 3 things. And I think those are the 3 things that we need to remember. Number one, in large countries, especially Europe, US, which should have been focusing on the recovery financing, all their additional resources are going into the war. So all the resources are going in, or not all, but most of them are going in so that we are able to do it. So I think that is the first thing which is there. The second thing is financing has shifted. So the nature of financing which is now coming in, I think is moving much more towards for-profit financing as compared to systems-based financing, which is still very much needed to shift the economies. So this is the second reason why finance pool is shrinking. And the third reason, the way I see it, is that there isn't enough political mindset and will, which is any longer remaining. So if you listen to all the debates, everything, there is very little about that going on. And I think people are almost giving up on the SDGs. So we as a sector need to push and say, hey guys, this is really, really important and we need to do it. And as many of you will know, their social economy resolution is going to be at the UN in April. If that resolution gets adopted, then we hope that financing for the sector will start once again. So this is my quick 2 minutes, Marilisa, and once again, apologies for being late.
You actually have more than 2 minutes. So if you want to go on a bit, you can. Do you have anything else you would like to shift? Yeah, you have 10 minutes. 10 to 15 minutes if you need it. Yeah.
Are you sure? Because I know. Okay.
Yes, we are. You have time. Go for it.
Okay. So I think these would be the main points which are there in terms of financing social economy. I think, however, we as social enterprises, we are entrepreneurs, right? Everyone in this room, I don't know who's in the room, Marilisa. So if you can just share, are they mainly a social entrepreneurs, civil society?
I think we have 2 social entrepreneurs in the room, right?
Only.
Yeah. How many social entrepreneurs put up your hand? We
Yeah,
had
there
only
are a
one put
number.
up their hand earlier.
No, there are
More.
More.
Most of the people in the room and online
And online,
are
yeah.
a combination of social entrepreneurs, social
Mhm.
enterprise resource institutions, and also
Ecosystem
organizations
builders.
that
partners.
build the ecosystem for social enterprises. So that's a combination.
That's fantastic. So this is basically the ecosystem which is there, and we are building out the social enterprise ecosystem. So one of the things which I would like to say is that though there is not enough money and financing which is there, there is what our role is as social, well, Catalyst is also partly a social enterprise ecosystem builder. But I think the role of us as social entrepreneurs and ecosystem builders is essentially to convince the government, to convince business, to convince everybody on how we are going to do it. And I think that is probably the most important, and by making ourselves the critical center stage of doing it. So Marilis has played a major role in this, but we as Catalyst have defined how do we build the ecosystem such that social innovators can flourish and such that we can get financing. So I think this is what we have done. The first thing we have looked at is we have said local communities have to be at the center. So I think that is something which is most important. And therefore, we have a report, and I think my colleague John could later share those with everybody, and I mean with Marilisa and then later, is the fact that we start with looking at the community as the center. So that is the one main thing that we look at. The second thing is we identify ourselves differently by saying we are creating the social innovation economy, and the social innovation economy is something which is based on values, principles, putting the community at the center and looking for the last mile or first mile, however you call it, and the forgotten mile, I say. That means the people who are the most marginalized and the most vulnerable. So this is the social innovation economy, which we work with governments to create. In Catalyst, what we do is we have a report on how this can be done with governments, which is the New Allies report. The way we are working with corporates, which I think is currently the biggest source of financing, though the stock markets are crashing, in the long term will be the biggest source of financing, is we can tell them, can you please put and work with social entrepreneurs across the value chain and source from social entrepreneurs. And we started the Catalyst Business Commitment, which many corporates are starting to sign. So this can become an additional source of financing, which we are looking at and seeing how to be able to take forward. So I think these are some of the main ways in which we can shift the ecosystem and we can work together. Marilisa, can I have 2 minutes to talk about Catalyst?
Yes, I believe you can, right? Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so Marilisa is one of the founding members of Catalyst 2030.
And Jonathan here. Jonathan is with us.
Okay, I don't know.
Hi, Jeroo.
Hi, yeah. Nice to see you. I can't see you, so hi. Yeah, so Jonathan is also part of the World Economic Forum group, which is there, and a member of Catalyst. And basically what we are looking at, Catalyst 2030 is all of these people put together, social entrepreneurs. We are 2,000 of us from across the world, and we are trying to create and build strongly the social innovation economy. So that is one thing which we are trying to do very, very strongly. And the second thing that we are trying to do is get corporates to work more closely with social entrepreneurs, governments to work more closely with social entrepreneurs, and last but not the least, shift the whole donor system so that we are able to get donors to look at things differently and start giving unrestricted grants to social entrepreneurs. So I think within the whole social innovation economy, this is something which we are pushing as for us at social entrepreneurs. And when that happens, we will be able to unleash more financing in the post-COVID world, where instead of us having more financing currently, it's gone the other way. Finances are shrinking for everybody. So this is my 2 cents worth. And back to you, Marilisa, for any questions that are there.
Jeroo, Laina Greene here You remember her? She was also the Catalyzing Change Week. She's the moderating this session. Yeah.
I
So
remember, yes.
it's the three of us here with you.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful.
Thank you, Jeroo, for that comments that you made. It's interesting. The first thing you talked about resources going to the war. Angels of Impact was actually also significantly affected by that. One of our funders actually gave the money to Ukraine, and that really did impact us badly. The second point you raised about shifting finance to for-profit rather than systems change, I could not agree more with you, which is actually why we need to be looking at community-based. So I totally agree with the fact that you said it has to be communities at the center, because you can't expect the top-down approach to really know the lived experience, the context. Now, I wanted to add earlier too, actually there is, just saying that we made impact is not enough. We should also say we have not created any harm or unintended consequences. I've seen an impact investor who was very meaningful, tried to do non-extractive, but the process in which they collected documents, it was still an uneven balance of power. It actually caused a lot of harm to the social entrepreneur who began to question herself, and when I spoke to her, she was literally in tears already, because I was telling her, no, you're on the right track. You've got a great business. And she was like, whoa, that's not what the impact investor said to them. So I think we should add that as an element. Do not create any harm. I think it used to be Google's do no evil at one point, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. And the not enough financing, I think, it's something that Jonathan brought up. Maybe, I don't know if you want to talk about the role that governments can play, because I think you brought up the first thing about education, right? That businesses can need to embrace it, but I think you also said that governments should be able to change the way we look at what business is and the role that business plays.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jonathan.
Just on that question, it's something you said earlier actually around governments potentially stepping in this place and distorting kind of thing. You know what? I've got a bit of a different view there. I mentioned I started off in the private sector working with venture capital funds. I then moved into government, and there was often this perception, quite rightly, that I had as well. Government, just get out of the way. Let us get on with this. We know what we're doing. Just support. Give us the money, and we'll roll. And this perception of kind of and maybe a bias that government is seen as being bureaucratic and slow and not innovative, in many ways is wrong. I'm not talking kind of some governments are, but some aren't. Example, iPhone. The touch screen was developed by the US government. The GPS was developed for military purposes and is now being commercialized by the private sector. Siri, again, backed by government money, and all these things are being taken on board, packaged and sold for commercial reasons. So I do think governments can really catalyze innovation in many ways. And when I was back in 2012, when the UK government was president of the then G8, it was the first time impact investing was even mentioned in that platform. And I look at how that's evolved and where we are now, around how just government mentioning the words can catalyze maybe a whole new asset class and sector. But indeed, with this example here of the iPhone, actually catalyze innovation in ways that none of us could possibly imagine. I mean, the internet is the other obvious one. It was a government innovation. It wasn't the private sector. It was just they were the ones who took it forward. On government financing in this space as well, I mean, the government was foolish enough to let me have their money to invest in social entrepreneurs. This is kind of before I joined the UN, what I did. And I think that's really quite important, because governments can maybe fund in different ways. Because my return, I expected no financial return. I wanted the pure social impact. So when I was going in with different sorts of impact investors, to your point around hybrid and blended financing, I think government's playing a role with the different, if you like, return expectations they have than a pure for-profit kind of, if you like, VC firm or whatever it may be. Having that sort of capital in the market can be incredibly valuable, and a very good blend or hybrid, if you like, into kind of a broader pot. So I wouldn't think of government just being a wholesaler, which the UK government did, by the way, with big society capital, but actually providing that different sort of funding that can be aligned with other parts as well, which is again where something like the CRESCENT can come in as well. Sorry, Jeroo, over to you.
Actually, if I can jump in here, Jonathan, I think governments, and that's what we've talked about in the New Allies report, that governments can work in close partnership with social innovators. Because when that happens, social innovators are able to scale much faster. And I don't mean just by giving money, but by being able to look at sharing data, look at that shared learning, look at the innovation. So, but when we work in partnership, then it can happen much, much, much faster. So I think
My
that
point.
is where I
Sorry.
think- Sorry, go ahead, sorry.
Laina, may I, because we're supposed to end at 3, so it's now
Oh, sorry.
14:47. No, I just wanted to give a chance to the 5 platforms to give some feedback to Crescent, because of course we have been dialoguing with the 5 platforms about the content of Crescent. And now we have put together at least the contours of what Crescent would look like. And as I said, it's a framework for us to get more inputs from you. So maybe we can have
Do we have the representative?
representatives from at least the 5 platforms to
So
come forward
platform
to
one,
give some
two,
feedback on
associate.
Crescent. Of course, the financing side is very important, and I hear you very well, Jeroo.
Yeah, and
That we have to work with government, we have to work with the business sector, and I think working with the business sector, there were some creative ideas that Kunmechai Viravaidya talked about this morning, and just a while ago, we were talking with the staff in ISEA, because now we're working with Shell Foundation, and Shell in Thailand is giving one baht for every sale to the initiatives of Kunmechai Viravaidya in Thailand. So those kinds of things can actually be explored. But at the same time, shifting the donor system, I think, needs systematic work.
Yeah.
It needs mapping. It needs targeting, no, Jeroo? And I'm happy that Catalyst 2030 is working with us on this for Crescent.
Yeah.
But at this point, I'd like to invite the 5 platforms to please come forward and just give some feedback initially. Of course, we can also do this after the conference, but maybe just to complete the cycle of this forum.
So
in this-
platform 1,
The We Live Food platform, who's here? Binaswadaya, Dompet Duafa,
who wants to present?
IARR also.
What's your reaction to the Crescent Initiative? Platform 1,
We Live Food.
We Live Food.
The health for all. Okay.
Okay, so that's
the first
4.
platform is from Binaswadaya. And Binaswadaya asked me to deliver our response. I think of course we are very happy when we heard about the initiative of Crescent, and agriculture is a very important sector in our societies. I think not only in Indonesia but also in I think most of ASEAN countries very important, and food production, especially during the latest situation when the geopolitical situation is under situation that uncertainty. So initiative that support the initiative for the social enterprise that working in the agricultural value chain is also very important. And actually, we would like to see what can we work together in this platform. I think the rest that we need to do in this platform is we need to come up with one specific proposal, with specific agenda that we can work together as a platforms, and also to seek another. I think building constituencies is also important, because if we want to use platform as our tool for advocacy, we cannot speak only by ourselves, but we need to come up with one collective voices so we can be heard by government. I think that's a response from the platform number 1.
You want to speak for that too?
In regard for the platform on health, as right now the COVID-19 has become subside, but impact of pandemic is having multidimensional impact, and I think we also agree that the pandemic has created setback in the context of accelerating SDGs, and most of setback, some of setback also experienced by the health for all in the health sector. For example, the access for vaccine, HIV, AIDS, and tuberculosis is also like because of the most energy funding sources as focus on COVID-19. Some of existing focus is we have to say that it was left behind during the COVID-19 pandemic for most of countries, and against the COVID-19 pandemic also shows, I think, what has been mentioned by Kofi Annan, the former UN Secretary General. He said that the biggest enemy of health is poverty. So this is also creating what I think create another rationale for us to be involved in this initiative for the CRESCENT, and we also see that government cannot work, especially in our experience in Indonesia. We need to have like collective effort to joining. So we have like by this platform, we hope that our effort, our energy, our resources can be collectively and accumulatively put to strengthen the system, the health system. Because yes, I quoting another quote from another Secretary General of the UN that our biggest strength in this pandemic is rely on the weakest health system in our society. So two UN section that I mentioned. So that's I think feedback from our from the first health the health forum. I don't know. Probably Raj can also add for another feedback for it.
Yeah, during the pandemic, the livelihoods
Maybe
of
you can introduce yourself because not everybody knows
Yeah.
you.
I'm Raja. I'm from Dan Foundation, based at Madurai in India. So Dan Foundation is the organization is working with around 3 million poor households by promoting the people institutions among the poor and farmers. We work in more than 15 teams, especially including agriculture, microfinance, health, education, climate change adaptations. Like that, we are working in more than 15 teams. Our major approach is mainly to promote people institutions. So build on this platform. So we are following the approach called the comprehensive approach, what Lisa was mentioning about it. So the comprehensive approach will completely eradicate the poverty among the poor community, as well as they'll make them to come out from the poverty entirely, like saying a self-declaration of the poverty. The people can able to say that, so I'm coming out from the poverty. Like that, actually, a situation we are able to create. So I think, especially on this Health for platform, so last 2 years we are working on this platform by integrating with ISEA as well as Dompatwaha. And so far, the first platform, the integration work as well as the kind of the knowledge sharing. So what kind of the knowledge we received from our experiences during the COVID situation, how we are able to enable the community by adopting the situations and to address the issue. That is what is a major area. There, our experience is mainly on the experience of the community and community institutions. The role of community and community institutions is very, very critical, because the government cannot do everything because they are working at the different kind of level, but they could not reach out the grassroots level. So that definitely the role of community institution is very, very critical. So that kind of the experience, how we are reaching with the community, how we are enabling the community for addressing the problem, and also how we are coping up with this particular situation. That is what a kind of the experience sharing was happened, and also that was quite useful and supportive for many organizations. Those who participated in the first workshop we conducted by involving many partner organizations as well as non-partner organizations. So we conducted. So now actually, because now we are planning to elaborate and promote this platform, Health for platform, at a different level, because we are looking for this participation of the many organizations in this platform. And we are looking for this organization, those who are involving in this kind of social enterprises. They must involve themselves in healthcare sector also, because they should not leave this only one area of livelihood or whatever is agriculture. So they must involve in a comprehensive way. They need to understand it. Then only they can able to do it. That is the kind of the experience we got it over a period of last 30 years is the Dawn experience. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Just Laina, because I think we're running out of time. One of the things that the CRESCENT initiative is actually going to do is to provide secretariat support to the platforms, and then provide seed funding so that the platforms can actually do action research, ecosystem building, constituency building. And I think that will help the platforms in that way. And then the virtual hub is actually intending to integrate, what we need for learning exchange, capacity building, resource mapping, and all that for the platforms. So I hope that we are not going to put the programs of the platforms in CRESCENT, but CRESCENT is going to support the initiatives of the platforms so that you can remain focused on your thematic areas. No, I hope you saw that intention, because although we interviewed you at length and had focus group discussions at length to know about what you are doing right now, you notice that CRESCENT doesn't talk about your programs, but it does talk about, I think, the mechanisms necessary so that the platforms can sustain the work that the good work you're doing. Is that, yeah?
Dr. Teo, do you want to talk about technology group?
Thank you, Laina. So I think I'm Albert. I represent the Technological Innovation Platform. So we appreciate that our platform fits in nicely under the SE Innovation section of the CRESCENT initiative. And now with APC on board, we are very excited. We can focus more on community networks. And then, Lisa, you mentioned in your presentation earlier, the importance of carrying out action research. So just this morning, I had a good discussion with Sabani. So we are going to embark on impact assessment on probably 1 or 2 community networks, because as what Ms. Jeroo mentioned earlier, we need to put the local community first and at the center. And yesterday, Gustav also mentioned the importance of understanding the local context. So I think to carry out impact assessment with a lot of focus on the local context, that will be very value adding in terms of carrying out action research. Thank you.
Decent work. Is WFTO here? Jake. And
I
also,
think we still have time. Maybe Dolan would also ask. Yeah. I think in relation to that, hi, I'm Jake Almanzor. I'm the VIP manager for World Fair Trade Organization Asia. So based on this discussion, and most of our memberships actually is more geared towards into not only incubating but scaling up their production because of what happened with the COVID-19 pandemic. And we have a lot of good business and best practices in terms of our production. That's why some of our suggestion in terms of approach for the decent work for all is maybe a good, like the action plan research that you have discussed, Ms. Lisa, is a very good initiative in terms of baselining and benchmarking where we at as we start, because I think this is one of the what we can catalog is something of we can sell at for impact investors or even funders for moving forward, or even with venture capitals. So my point is really on support for understanding on what we're good at, what we're best at, and in terms of support in this research that we can move forward into creating a more narrative for especially for our membership and expanding it outside of fair trade enterprise, but also with social enterprises. I hope that makes sense. Thank you.
would you like to add, Swapan?
Thank you so much. I would add just that, fair trade is a kind of real life business. You are doing business, and nobody works for the funding or anything. You need to stand on your own feet. So then having partnership with CRESCENT would give us the kind of entries to the community to figure out the next team to be partnering with in the fair trade. Thank you.
Rural revitalization, youth and social entrepreneurship.
Yes, good afternoon, and thank you, Lisa. On behalf of the Sources for Action China and of Rural Reconstruction Nepal, I am Marlon Palomo of the Philippine Rural Reconstruction Movement, one of the co-conveners of the framework of the platform on rural revitalization, youth and social entrepreneurship. And I would like to say that the CRESCENT initiative has been discussed many times already within the platform, and that we believe that the CRESCENT initiative will provide a framework for coming together, a framework for sharing and cooperation, especially that we all want to contribute to the attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals, especially those initiatives that are located in the rural, those that are into food systems development, and those that are into rural value chains. I think the CRESCENT initiative will provide a framework for us to share and a framework for us to innovate further. Thank you. With that, Lisa. I think the representative for the Sources for Action, Ganyong Wei, you want to say something? Not anymore?
Okay, we did start rather late though, so if you want to go on, Gomar? 2 minutes, okay. We started 35 minutes late, okay? No,
Yes, you
it
did,
is.
Gomer.
Yeah,
We started late.
we started 35.
Don't mess with going.
Sorry?
Maybe
5
10,
minutes, yeah.
Gomer.
Well,
I'm
Yes.
negotiating with Gomer now.
I think,
Gomer, can we have 10?
very reluctantly, yes. Yeah, no, I think it is very important for getting, this is our opportunity to get your feedback, really. Yes, someone here, yeah.
Yeah, good
Maria
afternoon again,
Katri.
everyone. So I think, but I would want to start off by saying thank you for introducing the framework to us in the private sector, specifically our industry and manufacturing industry. We have a corporate foundation, which is the Aboitiz Foundation, and separate to that is the family-led foundation, which is the Ramon Aboitiz Foundation. So it's two separate foundations, and they also have separate operations. One is focused on the corporate, one is focused mainly on microfinance and community. I think I was able to grasp around 2019 the BTP when it was introduced. It was one of the meetings in Manila, if I'm not mistaken. And I clearly remembered I was asking if private or sectors like us implement it in our operations, especially in the CSR operations, would we be getting like a certain certification that would entail, oh, you are doing this, this, and this, and this, and that. And then if you do business with other organization in a certain country around the Asia, it would also entail like not just not a feather on your cap, no, but is it something like the ISO certification that you would be because you would be standardizing your operations on CSR. You would be standardizing how you would do the baselining, the midlining, and the end lining. We were seeing opportunities on the framework, no. Once we do the baselining, so you would have before and after effect of your assistance to a community or to an organization. Going back, would there be like a certification that would entail like, okay, this private sector is doing this, so when it also goes to other countries, like say for example in Indonesia, would we be given like ease of doing engagement with other SEs with similar market than we have in the Philippines? Like for example, our inclusive businesses, yellow corn sourcing, is that also an opportunity for Indonesia that we could replicate our project because we have been implementing the benchmarks? Would it also mean like ease of doing it in the country of Indonesia? So those are the questions that I was.
That's a very interesting point. because I think just to give context, no, for those of you who have not really known about the engagement of PILMICO, which is part of the Aboitiz group, in implementing the benchmarks for transformational partnerships and women's economic empowerment in agricultural value chains. That's the set of benchmarks that we are promoting in the We Live Food platform. Okay, and I think the question has to do with if they actually succeed, right, in implementing the benchmarks and show that they're creating greater impact with their communities. Can we sort of provide a system for certification? Oh, that's a
Yeah, I really don't know how would it work.
It's a system for certifying. Let's just call it that, no, for now.
Okay.
Certifying so that we say that we have worked with you, and you have successfully implemented the benchmarks and improved the quality of lives and livelihoods of the farmers in the Philippines. And so we are we can actually give you that certification so that when you go to Indonesia,
because it's
the ISEA members in
it's a proof of the
Indonesia,
concept.
yeah, it's actually there's a rite of passage.
Yes, if I
So that you're able to engage. Now, I think those are creative ways of working with the business sector. And in the same way that we share information about bad practices of the business sector, I think we can definitely do a process of documenting and starting to recognize, no, maybe a certificate of recognition, no, at first, to develop a circle of business organizations who can work with us in CRESCENT, no?
Because
CRESCENT.
it's
business
also
partners.
a check and balance mechanism
Jeroo
towards the
too.
private sector.
Jeroo has something to say.
Jeroo?
Yeah, one of the things which has happened in Catalyst and we launched at Davos this year is the Catalyst business commitment. Why don't you take the work that has already been done? There's a website, there's everything, contextualize it for the region and take it forward, because that's what we want. So I think that would be something really good if you all could look at that, see, contextualize and take forward. John, if you could put the link into the Catalyst of the Catalyst business commitment in. So I think that would be something which would be very useful. My second point is when I was hearing about the farmers, we can also do South-South collaboration where using carbon credits, agricultural farmers can increase their income by 50%. So we are happy to link you to the member who has done this and is advocating for certification. So everything that the farmers do, if they just do it slightly differently, they can get a certification for carbon and be able to sell the carbon credits that come due to farming in the voluntary carbon market. And I think that is also something really interesting, and we can have this. And like you all have talked about millions of smallholder farmers, their income could increase by 50%. And we also want to then create a joint collaborative action around in COP. So I think these two, when I'm rearing this group, would be two very good follow-up actions to do with CRESCENT. So we can follow up with Gomer and Malirisa. John, we can do that, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, surely. I think these are opening new areas for collaboration with Catalyst 2030, and I think we would love to work with you on this in moving forward.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Thanks, Jeroo, for that intervention as well. I think we are coming to the end of our session today. Yes, I have a taskmaster right at the end of the room. No problem. No, I think we made a lot of very good inroads. So I think ending on the note about the need for some kind of standardization really helps, because one of the things that I know that the social enterprises we work with spend a lot of money trying to get ISO certification and then organic certification and then B Corp certification, and it just goes on. And when I looked at the benchmarks, I was like, oh no, not another one certification that they have to go through. And I think it's benefits both ways. Is unlocking the potential of private sector to be able to get involved, But at the same time, it's trying not to make it burdensome on the social enterprises. And just clarifying, Jonathan, I was not saying do not involve government, but I was actually underscoring Jeroo's point that we need to have partnerships. As Raj mentioned, social ventures actually have the lived experience, have the context, have the innovative solutions. I always remind people that necessity is the mother of invention. And the invention is not going to come up from people with the money. It's going to come up people who doesn't, right? The scarcity. So on that note, I hope all of you were able to get something. And I'm really glad, Carlos, that your lights went off too, because I think that's a great potential for us to unlock capital from other markets that we are not talking about as well. So on that note, thank you very much. I think this has been a very participatory group considering we were after lunch. So thank you very much. And thank you to all the speakers as well.